for his disciples. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 25 actually. We're going to start with verse 15. This is the parable of the talents. You might have heard it before, like I said, but maybe you haven't. Maybe this is brand new. And if it is, then I just want you to track with me. I'll fill in some of the gaps, but we're going to look at a few verses. Here's the scope of what's happening in this story. There's a guy who is wealthy and in charge of a lot of things. He has to take a trip. He's going out of town. He's leaving. But before he does, he wants to give some of his property, some of his assets, his talents, to 3 of his most trusted servants. And so that's where we jump in the story. He's about to go on a journey, but before he does, he wants to make sure that his money and his assets are still profitable, so he's leaving them to his servants. So chapter 25, verse 15 goes like this. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability, and then he went away. To one person he gave 5, to another 2, and to another 1. Now here's something that's really important to understand. He trusted them all the same. He loved them all the same. But according to their ability, he knew them so well that he knew what they were going to be able to do. He knew how they would be able to produce, in what environment they worked better under. So he gave one 5 because he knew that he could handle that much. He gave the other one 1 because he knew that was his limit. Not expecting any less, but understanding his servant. Knowing the person he was trusting, he gave them according to their own ability. Sometimes we say, oh, well, the guy who got 5, he was better than the guy who got 1 and the guy who got 2. Not at all. He viewed them the same. They were all 3 just as valuable. He just knew them better. He knew how to approach them. And so he goes on this journey. And then he leaves these 3 servants behind, and the one who has 5 goes out and he invests those 5, and he uses the money that was left for him, and he's able to double it and get 5 more. The guy who had 2 did the same thing. He went out and he used it, and he was able to double it, and he came back. But the guy who had 1 was scared. The guy who had 1 knew that the master he had was very shrewd. And so he decided, you know what I'm going to do? I don't want to lose it. That's what he said. So I'm just going to hide it. So he went over and he buried it and he hid it, because he said, it is better for me to give it back to my master the way he gave it to me than for me to risk going out and potentially losing it. So the master comes back from his journey and he encounters the guy that he gave 5 to, and he says, hey master, look, I've done well. I've got 5 more for you. And his master is delighted. He is overjoyed. He's like, well done. You did what I asked you to do. You took the 5, you made more. You're amazing. You're awesome. I love you. And then the guy who does 2 and double those, he comes up and he says, look, I have 2, not as many as 5. I had 2, but I went out and I worked and I doubled it and I got you 2 more. And the master says, just like he said to the other guy, well done. Well done. There was no expectation of how much they were supposed to come back with. But he knew how much he left, and he wanted to make sure that it continued to progress. And so he was faithful. The guy with 2 was just as faithful as the guy who had 5, and the joy from the master is the same. His joy towards his servants is the same. He loved the one with 5 as much as he loved the one with 2. But then he runs into the guy who only had 1. And they start this conversation. He says, master, I knew that you were shrewd, and so I hid it. Here is the one you gave me back. And what I want to look at is the master's response to this servant. And so we're going to jump a little bit ahead in our story. I recommend that you read the whole thing. It's pretty awesome. But we jump further ahead. Verse 26, his master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant. Whoa. The mood just shifted. The mood just shifted. His master was celebrating because his servants had been faithful, but then he runs into this one servant and he says, whoa, you are wicked and you are slothful. And that might seem a little harsh if we're completely honest, but he didn't do what was expected of him. And so his master continues, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed, then you ought to have invested my money. You ought to have invested my money with the bankers, that I would have at least received what was my own with interest. You should have invested it. You should have done something with it. Instead, you hid it. Look, here's what's going on. He's talking to his disciples, but he's talking to you and he's talking to me. He's saying, I have to go away, but I am entrusting you with the gifts and the skills that I have given you to continue to proclaim my name, to continue to make me known, to share the news of the gospel with everyone around you who is hurting and lonely and suffering. And let me give you just a little secret. That's everyone. That's everyone. Because they might look like they're doing well, but they're far from God and they're missing out on life. They're missing out on the best plan that God had ever for them, and they are missing it because they don't know God. So when we're talking about who needs the gospel, who needs the news, it is everyone around us. And so he says, hey, go out and share. Some of you might be better at sharing your witness with people. Some of you are amazing, and you are going to be like that guy who had 5, and you go out and get 5 more. Some of us are going to be like the guy who gets 2 and goes out and is able to do 2 more. But the joy your Father has in your obedience, in my obedience, is the same. The fulfillment, the love, the way he feels about us when we're obedient and we go out and we share the news with others. Look, what we're doing is the Great Commission. Go and make disciples of the nations. We do it one by one, the best we can. All we're doing is presenting the story of God. What we can't do is hide it because we're scared. What we can't do is say, I don't know how people will respond. People might think that I'm attacking them, that I'm judging them, and I don't want them to think ill of me, so no, I can't. I'm going to hide my faith where I know it's safe, and I'm going to protect it, but I'm going to keep it to myself. I'm afraid of how I will be seen. I'm afraid of what people might think of me. I'm afraid of how my friends will treat me, what my family members might say. Let's not become that last servant. Let's not become that. Let's take the opportunity of Easter. If you're watching this during Holy Week and Easter is still coming up, look, today is actually Tuesday, Easter's on Sunday. That gives us quite a few days to turn to someone, a neighbor, an uncle, a coworker, someone who's on a football team with us if you're a student, someone who's on a lacrosse team with you. It doesn't matter. Someone near you. What if we turned to them and we said, hey, look, Easter's coming up. Would you come to church with me? Or maybe you just tell them about how God has impacted your story. It doesn't matter how you do it, but are you using your talents and your gifts to spread the news of the Father?